And welcome back to yet another exciting edition of Light Beer, Dark Money. I am your humble host, Chris Clements, and sitting next to me is not Sean Noble. Sean is on vacation with his family, traveling. Oh, who knows where they're going these days, but he's off for the next couple weeks. I'm here with an old friend of mine, Craig Weiss, formerly with a tremendous company, Enjoy, that you might have recently heard was in the news, selling for $2.75 billion to Marlboro. So, which is tremendous. Congratulations on that. And but Craig and I have been friends now for how many years?
Gosh, probably pushing 10.
Yeah, 10, almost 15 years. YPO members, and he's here with his partner, Andy, to talk a little bit about their latest venture, something called Flagstaff Ventures, which is kind of revolutionizing the new venture landscape, and especially in the state of Arizona. So, Andy, welcome to you as well. Andy Richmond, coming to us live from, where are you coming to us from?
Just outside of Washington, D.C.
Just outside of Washington, D.C. Well, see, I was just in Washington, D.C. not 2 days ago. It was quite cool there, and it was a whirlwind tour.
You just have to forgive Andy. He kind of talks funny.
Oh, yes, with a lovely...
It's not a traditional Washington, D.C. accent. D.C. via London.
Via London.
15 years ago, yeah. I moved to the U.S. in 2008.
Oh, fantastic. Well, why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself and how you guys kind of came together, and a little bit about this exciting, venture firm called Flagstaff Ventures.
Sure. So I was a co-founder of a company in London, and we did a lot of work in the healthcare space. And in 2008, you might remember there was a lot going on in the US around healthcare. So I moved out with a small team of people from the company in the UK and established a footprint here in DC. That company was later acquired in 2011, and I decided to stay on here. We were pretty settled with my wife and kids. And for the last decade or so, I've been working with early stage startups and scale ups. I'm really what I describe as a product guy. So I get involved in all kinds of product strategy, product management, product marketing type of activities. And I met one of Craig's brothers. Craig's got an interesting family structure, which maybe we'll tell you about. And one of the brothers, there's quite a few, was here in DC, and we connected. And because of my entrepreneurial activities and what I was involved with, he suggested maybe around 7 years or so ago that Craig and I connect. Craig was involved in a company on the outer limits of health tech, which again, maybe he'll tell you about. And we became fast friends, and I've got more involved with some of Craig's activities and some of the companies he's founded. And in the last couple of years, Craig has rolled that into Flagstaff Ventures. And now he has pulled me in pretty much on a full-time basis to help him build this new venture fund and to support the portfolio companies that he has identified, and to find new ones that we can bring in and we can help grow and expand. And it's been a whole lot of fun. So
that's great.
The backstory.
That's great. We were talking earlier about the name Flagstaff Ventures, and sort of, Craig, what your vision is behind that.
Yeah, so I, when I tell people where did I come up with the name for our early stage consumer venture capital fund, I always say, well, the first 20 names I thought of were all taken. So that's how it started, of course, which is the truth. And then, but when I settled on Flagstaff, I did it for two reasons. One was nod to my Arizona roots. I'm an almost Arizona native. My family moved here when I was 6 months old. So I always try to qualify almost native because I don't want to steal the thunder of the people who were actually born here.
I think 6 months. I mean, there's a little bit of grace there, right?
All right. Yeah. Well, so I've been here, I've lived abroad for 4 years. I went to college back east, but, I've been here for more than 40 years. And so the other reason why I liked the name Flagstaff is, even for those who've never been there or heard of the place, as a consumer guy, I'm really a brand guy, and I always like this idea of like when you build your brand, you're planting your flag in the ground. You're like, hey world, this is who I am. This is what I represent. And so I like the name for that reason. I've always loved the word Flagstaff. It's got kind of a strength to it that I've always appreciated.
Well, but also, I mean, just the imagery of Flagstaff, you know, the cool pines, but also the San Francisco peaks, which are you know, a sign of, you know, elevating yourself to a much higher level.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's elevated. It's, you know, we have the highest mountain in Arizona there, and also just, you know, the crisper air, the cleaner air, where you strive and achieve. You know, it's at 7,000 feet of elevation. And yeah, no, and I think it's a little hidden jewel in Arizona that people don't think about very much. But, you know, when it's uninhabitable for human life in the summers in Phoenix.
Yeah.
You know, people can get in line for 7 hours and drive to Coronado, or they can just go 2 hours up I-17 and, you know, be in the cool pines and, you know, the fresh air, Route 66, a historic downtown, a university. I think Flagstaff has a lot to offer.
Oh yeah, Flagstaff is a great place. We go up there quite a bit. In terms of Arizona and the economic viability of Arizona, we talked a little bit about that before we came on air, and Arizona in the past has been seen in different ways, and yet what's happening in all of our universities, and including Arizona State here in Phoenix and Grand Canyon and elsewhere, has led to a really great environment for a firm like Flagstaff Ventures to be creative.
Yeah, I think very few people, other than the people who live here and who are, you know, have their fingers on the pulse as you do of the business community, I think very few people outside of that, and certainly outside of Arizona, fully appreciate what's happening here. And I think we're in for an economic sort of tsunami of growth because we have all the right ingredients. We have a stable electrical grid, which California doesn't have, which not even Texas has, which, you know, Texas has the most diverse energy grid in the country, and every time there's a winter storm, they lose power. And so
that's an amazing fact.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And so we have, you know, 330 days of sunshine, we have stable power, and we have the largest U.S. university, which, you know, people don't fully appreciate, you know, with Arizona State University. We have the largest business school in the United States. Grand Canyon University, which most people haven't even heard of outside of Arizona, has over 100,000 students now.
Yeah.
And so, and then you say, well, wait, we had the largest foreign investment in U.S. history, $40 billion from Taiwan Semiconductor. They could have gone anywhere. Like, they could have gone anywhere in the world. They chose the United States, but they could have picked any of the 50 states. Why did they pick Arizona? And so, you know, you have to ask, well, that's interesting. Because, you know, we have all of those things. We have a very low state income tax, so we're very pro-business in Arizona. So what's interesting to me is when I looked at the landscape, I thought, well, gosh, you've got hundreds of thousands of these graduating kids coming out of these universities, and we don't want them to leave and go to, you know, San Francisco or New York or wherever. What we really want is for them to stay and continue to contribute economically to, you know, to this, you know, I think, you know, special state and special place. And you know, if they have ideas for businesses, what they really lack is access to capital. Mm-hmm. And what we felt was early stage capital in particular is just, you know, over the last 15 years, everyone's moved upstream. You know, I feel like 20 years ago, venture was pre-revenue and private equity was post-revenue. Now venture's post-revenue too. And, you know, private equity is like a Series D pre-IPO. And so these kids have no ability to get money, and they have the great ideas. They're hardworking people. They just need the capital and maybe some mentorship and strategy to help, you know, launch them on their path. And so, you know, for me, I've really developed a service mentality of trying to be of service. I wouldn't be here if I didn't have a mentor who took my calls for pretty much every day for 2 years.
Yeah.
So.
Well, how do you evaluate these businesses? I mean, what makes a business that a Flagstaff Ventures would want to invest in?
Well, so, you know, first of all, I stay in my lane. So I'm a consumer guy. I'm not a SaaS guy. I'm not a fintech guy. I'm not a cyber guy. I understand brands, and, you know, was fortunate enough to have built, you know, a unicorn in the consumer space. And so I stay in my lane in that regard. So it's got to have a brand. There's got to be a consumer-facing brand. And then I'm really looking for this is going to sound a little corny, but they have to be good people. At the end of the day, I'm not giving money to someone that I think is kind of a jerk.
So you look at, I mean, the culture of what they're trying to create as well.
Yeah, been thinking about it a lot. There's sort of a karma piece to this. They have to be good people who are trying to do good. And what I mean by do good is not from like a judgmental place, like I'm going to judge, is selling French fries a good thing or a bad thing for society. Are these good people who are treating their vendors well, treating their customers well, treating their employees well? Are they good people? And then they have to have humility. So whenever I meet someone who I get the vibe that they have all the answers, it's like I turn and run in the opposite direction. So that they've got to have humility, they've got to be coachable, they need to have a growth mindset that they always want to learn and improve. And then, to me, if you have all of those ingredients, and they're, obviously they have to have a good business and something that's interesting. But those are some of the things I'm looking for.
Well, and you mentioned something that's really important, and that's revenue. And Robert Vera, who's the executive director of Canadian Ventures out of GCU, and I have had this discussion many, many times about companies that might be incubating there in the ecosystem that is GCU, need venture capital or whatever else, but they can't figure out how to get that. They can't figure out exactly what they're selling and how to get to revenue.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting.
But they continue to want to raise money because they think that's sort of the game,
right? And so obviously, if they don't understand that, the real world, then we can have that conversation to make sure they understand it's not the go-go days where you can have an idea and get funded. You've got to eventually have these things called customers and revenue to become a viable company. But what's interesting is we made 11 investments out of Fund One, and I'm by the way, I'm very proud of that number because I don't know anyone else in Arizona who wrote 11 checks, in their first 12 months, and so I feel good about all of the different companies that we've impacted. Half of those companies were pre-revenue when we invested, so and I think very few people do pre-revenue investments anymore, and that's another gap in the marketplace that we hope to be addressing. And but they had to obviously have a vision for something that was going to get to revenue, sooner rather than later. Because at the end of the day, this is it's not a beauty contest to who's got the most beautiful idea. You've got to build real companies.
Yeah, but if you look at the landscape the last several years, that seems to be something that was lost. And one of you can comment on that, and maybe Andy, if you can as well, in your experience.
Andy will be better than me at answering that.
We went through this stage, it seems like, where everybody was investing in ideas, and yet we lost the understanding of those ideas have to translate into products and profits and longevity.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And one, yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about myself. So one of the things I've had an opportunity to do over the last decade or so is work with quite a large number of companies who took in a lot of that money and have struggled to really find product market fit. And I'll spend a lot of time looking at the business and the business model and the product they've built and trying to understand the landscape and why it didn't happen. And quite often, often I'm putting actually by the investors, or I'm suggested to go meet the founder by the investors. And one of the conclusions I've made in many of these companies is that whilst often there is an underlying problem with the strategy and what they were trying to do, oftentimes actually a lot of the issues arise from the investors themselves, who are just giving these people or pouring in money and putting them under pressure to spend that money down when they really hadn't got that product market fit. And this doesn't just happen in companies who are raising early stage seed rounds. I've been in companies who've raised very, very significant amounts of money, and they've built very large numbers of. Well, they've got a large employee workforce. They've put a lot of people in, and they're still just trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And and I often say to me, so explain to me once more how you spent $50 million, and they're like, Andy, it's really easy. When you try and you've got pressure to hire and to just go. And I think one of the things, back to the question you were asking Craig earlier, is with these early stage founders, you really want to see them able to tackle the issues that just arise on a day-to-day basis and solve the problems, because finding product market fit is never easy. I mean, it's easy to build the deck and it's easy to build the financial model in Excel, but actually creating a product that solves a real want or a need, and I talk about creating a pull factor. I mean, there's a lot of people out there pushing product and they're spending a lot of money on marketing and they have this very high cost of acquisition. But to create a product which just pulls people, it's not easy, and it takes time, and you have to really listen carefully. And finding those founders who can do that listening and really kind of understand, get that market understanding is absolutely critical. And they're the founders that, and I said this to Craig the other day about one of the companies we're working with. They're the companies you're really going to go to bat for. You know, you're not only an investor, you're a believer. You want to see this succeed, and you're going to put yourself on the line for these people. And if you're going to do that, you have to have a founder who's kind of worthy of that, and the idea has to be worthy. And you've got to really believe that this is kind of making the world a better place and isn't just pushing something on people that they don't want.
I could not agree more. And I often find that some founders, they have a solution and they're looking for a problem. And but there's another piece too to what Andy just said that I think is really important. One of our other partners, Michael, was in town, and I was having to meet some of our founders that are already in Fund 1, and we're getting ready to launch Fund 2 here in the next couple of months. And he's like, I finally realized what you're doing. He's like, you're only investing in people that you really like. And it's to Andy's point, we love our founders and our CEOs. We do go to bat for them because we care about them. And so I think it's really important. I think there's a lie that institutional investors tell founders, and I've been told this lie. I've been on the receiving end, which is we're more than just capital. We're value add. We're strategic. We're going to help you in all of these different ways. And in my experience, the reason why I say it's a lie is because it tends to be that, yes, you get the capital, and that does help. But all of those other sort of commitments and promises don't materialize, and they tend to even maybe detract.
Because they're on to the next shiny object.
Exactly.
They're on to the next bite at the apple, whatever that is.
And so,
this was great a couple months ago. Hey, yeah, you guys, you're looking good. Maybe not. And but look at this shiny new thing over here.
You are 100% right. That's exactly what happens. And so we have committed ourselves.
Unfortunately, you have companies who take that seed money who operate in the same sphere, where they're constantly jumping to what the next shiny thing is and trying to raise more money, and yet they have nothing to show for it. I know of a company that specifically.
Yeah, no, you're right, and it happens all the time. And I think, but Andy brought up a really good point that I think people don't talk about as much, which is it's not just maybe the founders who are chasing shiny objects and being irresponsible. You have that problem on the investor side too, and they don't tend to take responsibility for the fact that they were asleep at the wheel, didn't help their companies, ran off against the next shiny object or to raise the next fund, and abandoned these companies that needed more than just capital. They did need mentorship. They did need strategic guidance because we don't know what we don't know. And so, part of why you see, like with Andy and myself, I think we wanted people who had a lot of life experience so that we have enough of a database for pattern recognition so we can say to our founders, hey, we've been through this before and this is what we've seen. And, we want to help you avoid the mistakes that we've made so we can make some new mistakes together. But, I think the investors haven't held up their end of the bargain in the past, and they have abandoned the companies they've invested in, and we've committed to not do that and to really try to provide value on a going forward basis.
But don't you think, Andy, that some investors get fatigued waiting for the product to materialize, waiting for the promises to materialize, and they just get fed up? Or if you have a company, and I've experienced this as well, that just isn't transparent or forthcoming about what it is they're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, taking a slightly different direction. I mean, one of the things coming out of the recent revelations in crypto, and I think it's kind of indicative of actually some of what's been going on in the industry, is there's a perception or definitely a belief that these investors know what's going on behind the curtain in these companies.
Mm.
When in reality, definitely based on just my own personal experience, so often they really don't. They genuinely think they do. But when I'm in there and digging in, and you get the trust of not just the founders, but the employees of the company who generally know what's going on, and given an opportunity and a safe space, they'll tell you what's going on. And the gap between the reality and what the investors or others or even someone's customers think is going on is really wide.
Oh.
And so, how do you create a culture where people can open up about the challenges, about the fact that they've just spent 2/3 of the money they raised building a product that isn't resonating in the market, and it's not just a sales or marketing issue. I've worked with a lot of CEOs and leadership teams who will just get rid of the sales guy or get rid of the marketing guy and hire a new team because they think it's a sales and marketing issue, and it really isn't. At the core, they have a problem. They have a problem in that the product isn't really meeting a need, and you've just got to kind of at some point allow people to open up about that and then say, okay, we are where we are. Yeah, where do we go from here? How do we figure it out without feeling that someone's just going to pull the plug or move on as you imply to the next cool company in the portfolio and leave these guys as a kind of write-off?
Well, and I think Andy said something really important there, which is a safe space for people to share that information, because one of the things that I try to brag about our approach is my CEOs call me with bad news because they know I'm not going to freak out. They know Andy's not going to freak out.
Well, that's a level of accountability you just don't see very often, right?
Yeah, but the reality
and that they would feel comfortable in saying, okay, we missed this target, or this is, something happened with the revenue stream that we thought was going to transpire.
Well, and I think that if they know, I'm always sort of a leave the judging to God kind of a person. So they know we're not judgmental, and it's just like, okay, to Andy's point, like, well, where do we go from here? Well, if they don't tell us what the problems are, we can't help them. So the only way they're going to tell us the problems is if they feel safe and that they can be vulnerable and share, hey, this did not go well, or we lost this big customer, or we thought this was going to work and it didn't. And so they're only going to tell you that if they feel like you're going to be helpful and not hurtful.
Well, that's an entirely different approach, I would imagine, within the marketplace.
It really is, because
so you're creating a whole different culture within the marketplace.
Yeah, and not to get into the other two pillars of your podcast, but
I think it's actually quite reflective of those pillars.
Well, because I'll go back to the first person who I remember articulating, sort of compassionate conservatism was W, right, George W. Bush, and I would say, just to borrow that sort of vernacular, we're trying to be sort of a heart-centered venture capital firm, or like a more spiritual VC, because I think most institutional investors don't see the people they're investing in as human beings. They just see them as dollar signs, and they're just sort of pawns on a chess table to move around. And every one of our companies know that I care more about them as a human being than I do about profits. And because I know that if they know that, then they're going to tell me the truth. They're going to be open to be helpful, and then we're going to have better outcomes, which is going to just have this byproduct of profits at the end, as a natural outcome.
So, I mean, kind of what you're promoting is both success and significance within the same.
Yeah, I think
within the same venture.
Yeah, I'm starting to believe that,
like, a CEO could strive for both now.
Yeah, I would take it a step further. I don't think there's good outcomes when you ask someone, what's your goal? What are you trying to achieve? And they say, I just want to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that leads to good outcomes. I think you get, when you get Bernie Madoff, you get all sorts of bad outcomes when that's your...
You get Silicon Valley Bank.
Right.
We had a guest on a couple of weeks ago, John Hunter, who's been in the software space for a long time, and what he brought up was exactly what you guys are bringing up: is that something like Silicon Valley Bank or these other banks that are failing, it's endemic in the culture. It's people are talking about just their investments or whatever else, but really it's cultural rot within these organizations that led to these decisions.
Yeah, and you saw it in different companies. It usually takes down CEOs. You saw it with like the Uber CEO and others, where that it's clear that there's not a lot of compassion, there's not a lot of care about human beings, and that tends to have bad outcomes. So yeah, we're very heart-centered. We're very focused on the people. And look, every one of these CEOs or founders, like, they have families, they have lives, right? They're real people who have struggles. And look, it's part of what I loved about YPO, and I know you have too, is YPO is not just about business. You're treated as a human being. You've got a family. You've got your own personal, it's like personal, professional, family, as you know, when you give your updates, because there's 3 different silos there. It's not just business. It was a good education for me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And being a part of being in a company that actually understands that and promotes that through your own investing, I think is really important and really unique.
Well, and we, we only want operators on our side, people who've been in the real world. The reason why Flagstaff Ventures started was, so after Enjoy, I founded a couple of other companies. One of those got venture backed in the year 2020, a company called Retainer Club that I co-founded with one of my best friends, Blair Feldman, an orthodontist in town, who was the team orthodontist for the Suns and the Diamondbacks. And I went out, we got venture backed in 2020, and I went out in 2021 to raise additional capital for Retainer Club. And I got introduced to 10 VCs from a friend of mine. And my joke is I forgot how much I hated VCs. And it was like all the cliches were true. It was, as I joke, it was, 10 young, dumb white guys who had never run a business in their life and, had never lived in the real world and thought that the world runs like an Excel spreadsheet. And as somebody who's lived in the real world, and as you have too, that's not how things work, right? It's a mess. And so I was complaining to a very sophisticated friend of mine, a kind of a guy at the top of the power structure on Wall Street. And he's like, well, if you think they're all idiots, why don't you do it yourself? And I was like, wait, but no, I'm trying to raise money for my company. But the more I thought about it, I'm like, no, he's right. There's this inefficiency in the marketplace. And so I realized, and the resonance has been profound, because when founders talk to people like us and we get it, it's like we've slid our chair over to their side of the table. Because they're just like, we hear, the feedback I'm getting is, people are saying things like, oh my God, you're the first person who really understands my business. Or you're the only one asking the right questions. And it's like, yeah, because I'm you. I've been in your shoes. I get it. Like, I know what the challenges are, because I've had to deal with those challenges too. So that part's so much fun. And I think I used to joke that, the bar is so low. Like, if we're just not jerks, we're in the top 1%.
But also you're maybe the first person that genuinely wants to understand the business. And you talked about diving in and mandating that the business be very transparent and share the good and the bad. Your initial approach can only facilitate that.
Yeah, and once you so first of all, as you know, you can't fake some of this stuff, right? You can't fake authenticity. You can't fake that, caring or compassion or empathy. You either kind of you feel those things or you don't. People can see right through it. They know when people are being inauthentic and they're just saying the words that they think they're supposed to say.
Yeah.
We all know that. We've been in front of those types of people. So, when I meet founders, one of the things, and I think one of the things that I love about organizations like YPO is, people like you and I, we genuinely are passionate about entrepreneurship. Like, I love entrepreneurs. I just think that they are the engine that makes this economy go. And they're on the front lines, taking those arrows, making payroll every 2 weeks. Like, it is hard, right? It is so hard. And they're under so much pressure and stress. We know, because we've lived it. And so I just want to support those humans, because they're doing such sort of yeoman's work, supporting our economy, and it's challenging, and I think it's thankless. And I think a lot of, times you hear the word entrepreneur and it almost has a negative connotation. People think, oh, they're getting all this money and they're wasting it and they're not doing anything. And I think just sort of the opposite, but it's a lonely business, which is why, like in YPO, you have a forum and you meet with other CEOs and founders, because you can commiserate about how challenging some of these things are.
Well, there's going to one of our other pillars and freedom. There's a misperception in our country that the economy is dependent on these multinational massive corporations, and to a certain extent that they play a role, and that's fine. But the majority of jobs, the majority of employment growth in any type of cycle is done by entrepreneurs and small to medium family businesses. That if they don't grow and if they don't employ more people, they're in trouble. And so they need firms like yours and others to help them in that journey.
Yep, no, it's exactly right. And it's the long tail. People are focused on those top big corporations, but the long tail is much bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Andy, how do you see the venture landscape in the country over the next several years? What do you think are some of the opportunities and pitfalls?
Yeah, I mean, I'll come back to the Arizona thing that we mentioned earlier. 'Cause I
Sure.
do think there's some interesting pieces there, but just one other thought or a couple of thoughts on what you guys have been saying, and then I think I'll address the question, is in order for these entrepreneurs and these creative individuals, I mean, I genuinely think of entrepreneurship as a creative act. I mean, it's a very creative thing, and it's very hard to have that level of creativity in a large corporation, which is why people inevitably leave or choose to never join these organizations to do that. And then taking that creative thought and turning it into a story in order to convince people to join you on the journey. And initially, it actually isn't about investors, it's just other founders or other employees. You have to begin to tell this story in a really compelling way. And ultimately, that story has to be compelling enough that someone's going to give you some money so you can get to the next stage. And I think one of the real challenges is in telling that story and creating that myth around what you're doing is not to get caught up in the hubris of the whole thing. And you start to believe your own storytelling and how you want that story to end. And I think that hubris thing, I think we see it around us in society. We look at these, entrepreneurs at the top of the pyramid who kind of, are struggling in many ways because that hubris inevitably brings us all down to earth. And I think that's something we have to really acknowledge as a society. We want to believe these stories. We want people to be out there doing this, but how do we do it in a way that's really sustainable and good for society? So that's one piece of it, I think, around how the US continues to be this engine of innovation and growth. And then you look at the situation that's going on somewhere like Arizona, where you've got these chip manufacturers moving inbound and going to be creating a new hardware ecosystem that existed maybe 20, 30 years ago, but kind of moved east and is now coming back. And then you've got these young entrepreneurs moving in from the West Coast, as Craig said, from New York and other cities. And you've got this convergence of kind of factors in this ecosystem that I think are really, really interesting. And one of the things that has really caught my imagination, having spent time, I was in Arizona last week and having spent quite a lot of time over the last few months, is, at the same time we're watching ChatGPT and the AI thing going on and what's going on with software, and we're aware of the needs that has for the hardware and the chips and this kind of convergence of all of these pieces. And so on the one hand, you've got people beginning to think through, what does this AI thing mean for society? Are we all going to be, looking for jobs in the coming years, or looking for ways to spend our time because there just aren't any jobs? At the same time, you've got these people here with this level of creativity and thinking in new ways about creating value for society and offering things that people really maybe don't know they need today, but are likely to realize they need in the future. So it feels really really positive. And I was out with Robert from GCU, who you mentioned earlier last week, and I was at a pitch event. And I think this younger generation get a hard time, the Gen Zs or the millennials. I tell you, when I've spent time with these people, I feel more optimistic having spent time with them than just about anyone else I spend time with. I mean, they're really doing it. They're realizing that the lives their parents maybe had, they don't want. They want something different. Their values are different. I think that I have a lot of alignment with the values they have, and they're creative. And I'm actually very excited more generally for what's going to happen in entrepreneurship. And I see it just with the companies that we're meeting. I mean, we're now working on this fund two, fundraising. And Craig can talk to this. I mean, we have so many opportunities inbound. And not only are they great ideas, you meet these people and you're like, wow, like it's a great idea. It's a great team. I can see the opportunity, and it's just now how do we get these guys capital? We take it upon ourselves. Like, we've got to fund these guys. We need to find a way that we can bring money into our fund so we can give this money out to these people because they're genuinely worthy of it. And society needs, this to work. So I'm excited about the future.
Yeah, and I'll just say
that is a ringing endorsement of GCU in Arizona and the opportunities that are happening here in the Grand Canyon State for sure.
No question, and just to piggyback, I mean, first of all, with GCU, free rent for our portfolio companies, and access to the student internship pool, and it's a wonderful partnership. And to just reinforce something Andy said that I think is thematically really important, which is, I feel like in the for-profit space, so putting aside nonprofit companies, in the for-profit space, I almost feel like there's two types of companies. There are the ones that if you zoom out, they just want to provide value to their customers and be appropriately compensated for doing that. And then you have companies that are sort of just trying to figure out, how do I take the money that's in Chris's pocket and get it into my pocket, and in the most efficient way possible. And providing value, like, that's not what's most important. What's most important is, how do I get as much of his money as I can into my bank account? And I don't want to say it's predatory, but like, we know those types of companies, right? I mean, when you have a company, like, I'll just pick on a category like gyms, right? When 30% of your revenue are people whose credit cards are getting zinged every month and who are never showing up, that's not a good business, that you're basically getting money without providing value. That's not the kind of business I want to be in. Or whatever, gift cards where they're like, it's great, 25% never get redeemed. Like, that's not the business I want to be in, where I'm making money by not providing value. So the businesses that we want to back and we are backing are ones that are trying to, do the right thing. And again, it doesn't have to be that they're, changing the world and it's cold fusion, but if they're good people and they're providing value to their customers and they're treating their customers well and their employees well and their vendors well, they're providing value. Those are the companies that we support.
Well, that's a great revolutionary approach to VC for sure. And the fact that you have companies incubating at GCU is even better, because Robert will do right by them for sure. And it's a dynamic environment with a lot of resources.
Absolutely.
Having office there for a number of years, and I still have an office there, though I don't go to there very often. Where can we find you? Where can people find you?
So, I mean, you can reach out to us. Obviously, we were joking before the show that right now our website's a landing page, flagstaffventures.com, but it will.
But it's a beautiful landing page. I'm looking at it right now. It has a view of the San Francisco peaks and some lovely foliage.
Well, it's funny about that picture. The cute story is, I said, what would be a good image to support Flagstaff Ventures? So I go on the internet and I type in, Flagstaff, and I click on images. And I found this picture, and I thought, this is beautiful. It's like, manifest destiny. The future is ours. Anything could be possible. But I'm a recovering IP attorney, so I couldn't just take the picture, right? I had to track down the photographer and license the photograph. And actually lives in Tucson. You'll be happy to know. And so I found him and licensed the photograph to be used. But we're going to have a proper website probably in the next week or so.
Oh, great. Great. And if a company, needs your help.
Yeah. So, I mean, definitely reach out. I mean, it's Andy at flagstaffventures.com, Craig at flagstaffventures.com. Someone can send us an email and we'll happy to speak to them. And, as Andy mentioned, we're getting ready to launch Fund 2 here because it's actually incumbent upon us. This is our responsibility to raise the capital that we need, because we need to raise the money so that we can deploy it to these companies, so that they can go, do what they need to do.
Well, congratulations to you both on the Fund 1 and the launch of Fund 2 and creating something really unique in the VC space that's trying to engage people as people and human beings and with families and hopes and dreams and desires, and not just a bunch of folks going after the almighty dollar. Because we all know that that's the focus. Just from a faith-based perspective, it never works.
Nope.
You end up getting swallowed up by the world, and that's an empty place to be. So, well, thank you for being here. Thank you all for listening, and God bless.
Our pleasure.